Hello, and welcome to the Thief in the Empty Room podcast, where Zen meets business in a unique exploration of mindfulness and mental health. Join me, your host, Craig French, as I sit down with artists, entrepreneurs, and Zen teachers to uncover the secrets of expanding creative problem solving, reducing stress, and finding balance in this fast-paced world. Today's guest for season number 2 and episode 5 is my old high school friend and the 2024 New York State Principal of the Year at Middleburg Junior Senior High School, Matt Sloan. Matt has successfully implemented a number of different mindfulness programs at his school that have seen a tremendous amount of success. Welcome to the show, Matt.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
As I mentioned to you, as we were getting prepped for the show, podcast is called The Thief in the Empty Room. So I sort of like to start off by getting our feet a little bit wet by reading a koan that the show is based off of. So here it goes. A student asked his teacher, "What concrete thing did the ancestral masters get when they obtained the peaceful state?" The teacher said, "It is like a thief who enters an empty room." What does that mean to you, if anything?
I think we're all striving and looking for something. We're all have these ambitions, these goals, these wants and desires. Truly, what we should be happy with is being at peace with ourselves, and nothing else matters. So I think the thief entering the empty room is truly representative of us taking those desires and those wants, setting them aside and being at peace with ourselves without anything to look for.
Fantastic. I mean, that is just spot on. That's
All right.
fantastic. Do you think that I mean, I know that this could be a little bit deep and esoteric for the kids, but do you think that concept in general, if it's whittled down a little bit to its core teachings, you think that would resonate with them?
Oh, yeah. We hear more and more as students become more aware of their emotional intelligence, of the anxieties that they go through on a daily basis. And what anxieties are our brains thinking about the what ifs of life. Am I going to get that job that I want? What if I go home and my power's not on? What if my parents are arguing when I get home? But so much of those anxieties have not happened yet, nor will they probably happen. But our brains begin to spiral. If we can teach students to be comfortable with the present, if we could teach them to be comfortable with their confidence of who they are and that they can handle whatever situation comes their way, then the anxiety will decrease and they'll be much more productive in the present. And that's truly what we hope to do, what I hope to do here in this school and what I hope to do in this field.
That's amazing. So that obviously leads me to a big portion of why I reached out to you, why I wanted to have you on the podcast. For those who might have missed it, or just to reiterate, you were recently nominated as New York State Principal of the Year, which is obviously a phenomenal acknowledgement and award. I know you've done a lot of other things, but one of the main programs that was most intriguing to me was your implementation of a mindfulness program within the school. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Please share with our listeners what exactly that looked like, what inspired you to implement this, maybe some of the pushback you may have received.
So to know how I got here, I kind of have to go a little bit into my past. So
Please.
I started my career in the city of Boston, working with the urban youth out there. I originally was going to be a high school social studies teacher, but wound up teaching sixth grade English in a heavily Hispanic community in East Boston. Really opened my eyes to the needs of students in the urban setting. I spent about 10 years in the city of Boston, became an administrator in the city of Boston. Once I left the city and moved to the Albany area, I became a principal of a suburban district and began to see how many resources these students came into the building with, how the social and emotional and the socioeconomics varied from the urban situation. And then I had a chance to work at a state level position as a deputy superintendent of a regional BOCES and saw how the state kind of allocates funds, how they allocate resources, and primarily those allocations go to the urban schools to support the needs of those students. Not too long after, I decided to take my career in another direction and I became a principal in a very rural district.
Still in Massachusetts?
No, this is still in New York, from Massachusetts to New York, the Albany area, and that's where I currently am. But coming into this rural district and having the experience of an urban setting, a suburban setting and then a state level setting, I came with a lot of understandings of the impact of socioeconomics, poverty, what resources are needed to sustain the school. What I realized very quickly was in an urban setting, you can throw a rock and there's an organization that will help your school, especially in Boston. There are a lot of startup companies that get tax breaks if they support schools. There's all these non-for-profits that want to work with students in the inner cities. The suburban schools had a ton of resources. They had a really strong tax base to get the programs that they needed. And then I really saw how the money was allocated at the state level to help these districts. But the rural districts, it really goes under the radar in terms of what the needs are. And what I mean by that is there is a lot of poverty. There are not a lot of resources. So to get help and support, it really takes organizations willing to travel and work with a small school to support them. The funding for rural education, because of the numbers of students, is significantly lower. I said, we have to do something here that is impactful in-house. And the first thing I typically do when I get into a new district is I look at data. I look at their academic data. When I got here, the school was on a list of the state that needs improvement. Our teachers, they were using old, outdated curriculum, even though they were brilliant teachers and they were making it work.
Yeah.
It wasn't translating. And then the biggest thing that I noticed was the discipline referrals. So there was a ton of discipline referrals. But when I looked at it and really examined it, I started to notice a pattern that they were all related to social and emotional need. So the school had a strict dress code where the principal before me would measure the length of dresses. There was a no hat policy, all these things that inhibited students from being individual, that inhibited students from expressing themselves in a positive way. So the first thing I did was I did away with the dress code. I did away with those constraints that take away the individuality of students. And immediately we began to see students begin to come alive. In working in a number of different areas, I brought in a lot of partners that I've worked with in the past. And one of those partners was a group called PAIR, Partnerships in Education and Resiliency. That's a Massachusetts company. They're affiliated with McLean Hospital and Harvard University at the time.
Wow.
It was founded by a guy named Dr. Gil Nome, who's a leading expert on social and emotional learning. And they worked with us to really establish a social and emotional program in the building based on these 4 clovers. And the 4 clovers are related to how students are reflective, action orientation, assertiveness, and other things that really develop the whole child.
Wow.
And a big part of that is they came up with this self-reflecting survey called the Holistic Student Assessment. And it's an 84-question survey that got really into how students present these resiliencies, how they relate to students of their own age in the same demographic and then across different states and regions. So we were able to get a really clear picture of how these students felt about themselves, what their challenges and strengths were. And then using that data, we were able to really establish some concrete social and emotional programming.
Phenomenal. I almost was envisioning you as like a scene in like The Beautiful Mind or The Matrix of you first coming into the school district and analyzing that data. And when you said that the disciplinarian data was jumping out at you, was it like blinking red light jumping out at you, like compared to the rest of the data that you were sifting through and analyzing? Was it
Yeah.
that glaringly obvious?
So I guess I should back up. So when I was in Boston, I became really interested in brain-based learning practices, physical, biological way that our brains actually acquire information, process that information, and are able to obtain it, modify it, and then use it to better ourselves. It's a really cool process and something that when it first started to develop, I was really on the ground floor, going to MIT to their brain labs, seeing what they
Wow.
were doing, talking with colleagues. I mean, being in Boston, you were just exposed to all of this.
It's almost a form
I
of neuroplasticity.
exactly. And it's crazy to think, but 20 years ago, we didn't have that vocabulary.
Yeah.
The brains were developed and never changed. And then that idea of neuroplasticity came into effect and how our synapses are being pruned constantly, reinforced by experiences. Experiential learning came into play. That's where project-based learning came into play. That's where Lucy Calkins and her work came into play, and all these different kind of people. So Eric Jensen, a big component of this stuff. Um,
Meditation,
yeah, and so
strengthening the gray matter and the prefrontal cortex and the
exactly, I mean,
discriminating.
that came probably 10 to 15 years ago. So this whole idea of brain-based learning, and then you start putting on the layers of, okay, how can we make the brain more susceptible to learning? How can we create an environment that allows us to learn in a more cohesive way? How do we talk to students in a way that's more less complicated and more purposeful and clear? And that was kind of my guiding light with my work, was when teachers just tell you information, when they do explicit instruction, as we call it, students are just passively listening. They're not actively listening. So how do we get students to actively listen? How do we get them to move around and interact with the content? And then that all comes into play when you start putting the social and emotional umbrella over everything. So that's kind of where my expertise. So when I looked at this data, I was all ready to pick this stuff out. And I was already like in the mindset of how can I, I knew what I had to do educationally to move the school from a school in need of improvement off that list just by changing a few things. I knew I could do that. But if I really wanted to make an impact, it would have to be looking at now, how do we create a social and emotional framework to support those students?
Amazing. So, to bring our listeners back to sort of where we left off, you had just talked about getting rid of the dress code policy,
Mhm.
implementing, or allowing a student to be individualistic. I'm curious, as someone who, as you remember, was quite free with my expression in high school, that followed me into college. I ended up leaving my lacrosse program because I had long hair and a beard and they wanted everyone to be clean cut and clean
Yeah.
shaven. So for me, this is a pretty personal topic. I'm curious if you did research, which I'm sure you did, because a lot of schools do have dress codes that they probably
Mhm.
will absolutely stand by.
Yep.
What was sort of the process of deciding getting rid of it? And obviously it was successful and the students immediately responded positively to it.
Right. First, I came to work here because a very good friend of mine became the superintendent. And I knew that he would give me kind of carte blanche to make decisions that I knew would work well. And he did. And there was no pushback from him regarding what I wanted to do or my vision to getting there. So sometimes that is a consideration. If you're in a school where the superintendent has a stronger kind of hand on things, it might be harder to do it. But when I talk to people about this, I utilize my brain-based learning strategy. And the first question I ask, well, why do you have this? And 9 times out of 10, they can't give me an answer. And if they give me an answer, they usually say, well, it's to, ensure that the learning environment doesn't have distractions. I said, distractions from what? Like, well, if girls dress inappropriately, the boys are gonna. I said, well, that's a cultural thing. I said, try going into a store and finding clothes that from the neck to the ankle. I said, they're going out and hanging out, and you're creating this immediate block with their culture. And you're saying, all right, we do not agree with you, we do not respect you. So we're putting this constraint on you. Is that your why? Is that why you want to do this? And inevitably, like, no, that's not our why. I said, but that's the why that they're thinking of. Immediately, they start thinking, all right, maybe this isn't the right way to go, and creates a whole conversation around creating individuals. And why do we want to create individuals? Why do we want them to be curious? Why do we want them to feel comfortable and feel like they belong? By you putting those roadblocks in that you can't think of a why for that actually makes sense, you're just creating a barrier.
And Matt, I just have to jump in and say that I've been doing a lot of research on the teen sort of biological development, and the teen and tween, they actually are still looking to their parents and adults for guidance around food, shelter, support. But this is the age where they start looking to their peers for music, for cultural sort of like influence. And so to strip that away from them, that's almost biologically wired into them, I think is a major detriment
Yeah.
to their
And
growth.
and I mean, you're missing a huge part of that they're the cell phone generation.
We're going to get to that too, but
Yeah.
yes,
So I mean that that creates a whole other paradigm
yes,
that we have to address.
yes,
And
which you did address.
I did address, yeah. And that's been life changing as well.
let's get to cell phone programs second. Let's
Okay.
finish out the
Yeah.
mindfulness piece.
So I got here, I looked at the data, I saw that. I immediately partnered with PAIR in the PAIR Institute, and we gave the students the survey, and the data that came back was fascinating. The way they break down their data is whole school data, and they tier it. So it's a three-tier model. Tier one students are very sound social and emotionally. Tier two, they're struggling with some things, but overall they're doing okay. And tier three is they have significant challenges that they're working through. Part of the data as well is when the students answer the questions, they kind of flip some of the responses. So if a student's just randomly picking things, it pops up in the data and we know it's invalid. Really interesting thing was we had no invalid reports. So the
Hmm.
students did take this seriously, and they
Wow.
have taken it seriously every administration. The fascinating part of the data was the way our tiers broke down was exactly similar to how an inner city tier breakdown looks. The struggles, the social and emotional struggles that my rural students have are the same struggles that my urban students are having. What is the difference between the two? Well, in the urban settings, I can throw a rock and get resources. I can have these organizations work with us. Out here, we don't have anything. We don't have anyone. So we had to really look at this data as a staff and say, what can we do? And I hate using this term, but what is the low-hanging fruit? What is like at the core of social and emotional learning? And what I discovered is it's the sense of belonging. So I always say belonging for the mind is like air for the lungs.
Uh-huh.
Every student wants to belong. Every student wants to feel like they're accepted. Every student wants to contribute in some shape or form to their community. They might not know how to do it. They might be immature and they might, struggle with that, but every person wants to feel like they belong to a community.
Because we have natural tribal instincts woven into our
Exactly.
DNA.
Exactly. So the first thing we did was tackle how do we welcome students into our classrooms?
Very first thing.
That was the very first thing.
At the beginning of the day or each
Each
period,
class,
each
each
class.
class.
Interesting.
How do you welcome your students in? Are you sitting behind your desk trying to catch up on paperwork and you're flustered and moving all around? Are you standing in the hallway greeting kids as they come in? What
Hmm.
does an interpersonal, boundary-based conversation with a student look like? Do you stand in the front of your classroom during the whole class, or do you walk around? How do students feel being welcomed into your room?
Wow.
Now, I know from a lot of experience, teachers don't want to have to do like additional work. So by presenting this, it's no additional work on their part. It's just them being aware and mindful of how they are presenting themselves and how they're welcoming students in. It's how they're dealing with students on an interpersonal level. And then the second thing we did was we implemented 2 minutes of mindful meditation every day at the same time. A good friend of mine worked at the Zildjian Cymbal Factory. A gift to me, he gave me a gong, a tabletop gong.
Wow.
So
Cool.
I brought the gong into school, and after our mindfulness, the gong is rung every day. And the rules are very basic. We're going to be doing 2 minutes of mindfulness. Please close your laptops, devices. You can sit, you can close your eyes, but you can do whatever you want. We just ask you to be respectful to those during this practice. And then we start the mindful practice, and after 2 minutes, the gong rings and we go on with our day. It's built into our core schedule. Every day at 10:25, we do mindfulness
Once a day.
once a day. And then I have teachers that do it every period. They start their periods off with it. So that's how we started this journey.
Phenomenal.
And within a year, discipline referrals went to next to nothing. Our scores on assessments rose, largely part to the work that we did looking at our curriculum, making it more brain-based, things like that.
Yeah, it's a
Um,
whole complete sort of picture.
yeah. But we got off that needs improvement list within 1 year. We were ranked 38th in the region, and within 2 years, we were ranked 12th. The year after that, we were ranked 10th, and we've been ranked ninth ever since in the region. And that's including a lot of suburban schools that have a lot of resources and money, and we've really taken this building to another level.
Unbelievable.
Yeah,
What was the response from the teachers?
it was mixed. When I first started in administration, I was 26 years old, and I would constantly get the "you're way too young to be a principal" response. I actually had a teacher retire because I was younger than her son. She's like, "It's time. I gotta go." I'm no longer in that "wow, you're too young to be a principal" phase, and my credentials coming into this building really set the stage for we should probably listen to this guy. So there were some staff members that were apprehensive, but I didn't push it. I said, we're going to do this, and I ask you to join us. I'm not asking you to change the way you teach. I'm not asking you to change who you are. I'm just asking you to be open to students being individuals, allow a little bit of chaos in your room so that students can be students, practice mindfulness with your students
For 2 minutes.
for 2 minutes, be open to new ideas. I had a lot of like, I don't know about this stuff. It seems a little, voodoo. It seems this and that. And I said, just give it a try. And within a couple months, I pretty much had the whole staff on board.
It's unbelievable, Matt. It's so impressive that you've been able to sort of implement this. And I know that you even took it a step further and you actually created some curriculum around this, right? That
Yep.
you distributed to the teachers and faculty.
Yep.
So there was more context
Yeah.
around mindfulness. Did they have to learn themselves, or did you just give them a clean
Yeah.
slate to just let them sort of?
So whenever you start a big initiative, especially in a school, teachers are used to things coming and going. All right, we got this new math curriculum. It's there for 5 years. All right, we got this new math curriculum. What I wanted to do was really set the stage for like a lifelong process and sustainability. Even if I left, this would be a sustained thing. So I was really aware and conscientious of what I was asking teachers to do, the capacity of what they already have to do, and kind of how these little changes can really make their world better. How we started it, I then began to add little increments. So once the kids started to feel like they had a say, they had a voice, they were individuals, they were no longer being oppressed, they became better students. The more teachers listened to me, and it really only started out with 4 teachers that really took my brain-based stuff seriously and began implementing project-based learning projects, going into that experiential learning, asking questions on a deeper level, that they began to spread the word that this actually worked. The students were much more engaged. They're much more invested.
Proof is in the pudding.
Right. And then that began to spread. And then we were hit with the pandemic. Before the pandemic, we were a technology desert. Students didn't have laptops. We had antiquated smart boards. And what the pandemic did was it jump-started a lot of initiatives that I wanted to do, but would have taken a lot longer.
Wow.
We got a one-to-one laptop into every student's hand. We began to utilize technology because we had to. So the Google Classroom came into play. What I really pushed was, so we had a lot of students that were isolated. There's one thing being isolated in an urban and suburban community, and there's another thing being isolated in a rural community where your closest neighbor could be 3 miles away. We really focused on how do we check in with students remotely? How do we utilize our student support team remotely? How do we get students to discuss and talk about their feelings and emotions? And that first from March to June was crazy kind of year. We were kind of building the airplane as we were flying, so to speak. I had to create a website for us to use. We didn't have Google Classroom yet. It was nuts. So when we came back in September and we did this like on again, off again thing, I put into the schedule, advisory periods. So 8th period every day, every teacher had between 5 and 8 students every day. And it was so they could work on their social and emotional well-being. They could get to know a group of students and a teacher who they might not have normally got to know. So that it built that idea of community, it built that idea of support, it built the idea that we're in this together. And with the money that we got from the pandemic, I was able to pay teachers that extra period to do this. So every week I would give the teachers curriculum to work on. I would give them articles to read with their students. We did projects, we did contests, and that really got us over the pandemic hump without too much damage. We really reinforced those social and emotional learning skills. We really reinforced that sense of community and belonging. We worked on self-advocacy and assertiveness of how students need to speak up for their well-being and what they could do to help the community. That really, we didn't just sit aside and let the pandemic kind of wash over us. We really took it as an opportunity to grow.
Proactive as opposed to reactive.
Exactly.
That's amazing. You talked about being in a technology desert,
Yeah.
prior to the pandemic. That leads us now to another major initiative that you rolled out,
Yeah.
which is the cell phone ban. So talk to me a
Yeah.
little bit about that.
So it's not a cell phone ban. I want to clarify that.
Apologies.
We are, we created a school with, we wanted to limit or get rid of distraction, a distraction-free environment. And the cell phone and technology, the watches, the cell phones, the devices, those were the greatest distraction to our educational community.
Not clothing.
Not clothing, no, not clothing at all. We communicated with a couple districts that were playing with the idea of doing this. One of our neighboring districts actually did it a year before us. Starting in October the year prior, I went to our Board of Education and the superintendent and said, I want to do away with cell phones. I want to make this a distraction-free environment. And they were on board with it. They said, all right, well, how are you going to do it? So there was a company that came out called Yonder, and they had those pouches, probably all well aware of that at this point. So I explored the idea of getting the pouches for the school. It seemed like the quickest and easiest way to do it. Then I began, and that was a huge investment that the district would have to do. I started to meet with student groups and staff groups. Students were very apprehensive, as you would think. But what really pushed me to continue to do it was I had a couple students that said, I need this. This is my security. I can't be away from it. And in my mind, that was like, we have a severe problem on our hands and we need to correct this right away.
So interesting, Matt, because there's a lot of talk in therapy and mental health around attachment theory.
Yep.
I don't know if attachment theory has evolved to including the cell phone yet, but it sounds like
Oh, it has to. It
there's
has
a
to.
I haven't heard much of it, but that's what my mind just went to was just
Yeah,
that
yeah.
attachment to this device as a safety,
Well, it's
almost the way a parental figure would be, or an intimate partner or something.
yeah, it's a serotonin Pez dispenser, the cell phone. I mean, it gives you instant feelings of euphoria. You know, when you get a like on something you post or you see something or you buy, it's so addictive on so many levels. And it's such a distraction to our everyday lives. So many accidents are caused by people on their cell phones. Students can go an entire day of not learning anything because they're just worried about who's texting them or what Snapchat's coming through. I took that idea and those concepts and I eventually it made it to the parents. That meeting, I'll never forget it. It was in our library and I'm sharing with the parents my idea. And they said, we don't want the pouches. I said, okay, why? They said, well, in our mind, that's the nuclear option. We would much rather you come up with the most outlandish consequences possible. And we will support that. And if they still are on their phones, then we'll support you getting the pouches. But we feel that students need to check in with their parents regarding sports, activities. Once again, we're in a rural community. You can't just drive to the school in 5 minutes. Some people are traveling up to 40 minutes to get to our school.
Yeah.
I said, okay, I hear you. And then they said the cliche thing, in the case of an emergency, I want to be able to get in touch with my child.
Yeah.
And I had this answer lots. The FBI does not want a child on their device during a crisis. There's God forbid, a shooter in the building. The last thing they want is for cell phones to be going off and ringing. The last thing they want are for students to be sitting in the back of the room, scared out of their minds, giving their parents false information because all they know is that they're sitting in the back of the room. They have no idea what's happening in the hallways. They have no idea what's happening outside. It ties up the phone lines for emergency responders. The second I started laying that out to the parents, they all got quiet. And I said, look, if you want your child to be on the phone with you and then have them noticed by the shooter, then we'll keep cell phones. I said, but my child is not going to be anywhere near their device during an emergency. They're going to be hiding and listening for instructions. And so the conversation completely went in my favor at that point on. But I did take their suggestion about the pouches. I took it and ran with that. So I came up with really significant consequences. If you're caught with your cell phone, you immediately get a 2.5 hour detention after school. You're not allowed to play on sports activities. If there's like an event happening within 2 weeks, you're not allowed to attend or attend a field trip. If you're caught a second time, you get all of those consequences plus 2 days of in-school suspension. And so I like thought about like, what's the worst thing I could do right now? And the
Yeah.
parents were all for it. So within the first year of doing it, there's 180 days of school, and we have approximately 500 students. I only confiscated 63 phones the entire first year. Sounds like a lot, but I was expecting to do 63 phones in the first week of school. So it has worked out wonderfully. This school year, we're in our second year of doing this. I've only confiscated about 10 so far, and we're, almost through November. And I'm not blind. I know students are sneaking into the bathrooms. I know they're sneaking it in their lockers. What I don't see are students on their devices in the classrooms. They're not on their devices in the hallways. They're
Yeah.
talking to one another. They're
Hmm.
interacting with one another. We do let them use their cell phones during lunch. And that was an ask by the parents so they can communicate if there was a sports change or a schedule change.
Yeah.
And honestly, that's kind of where I have majority of my problems right now. So I'm tempted to remove it from the cafeteria. I might have the governor of New York on my side because she's considering legislation to remove cell phones altogether, which would be wonderful. But as of right now, it seems to be working for us.
It's so interesting, man. I'm sure you're on top of this being in the position and the career that you're in, but there seems to be a bit of a cultural shift happening where LeBron James just announced that he's getting off of social media. There's a whole movement around that generation of teens that are doing away with social media, maybe not doing away with cell phones, but at least doing
Mm.
away with social media. I wonder if it's just this thing where social media and the personal cell phone is still fairly new to humanity. And we might have all gotten super excited and enthralled by it for a period of time. But over the long period, we might be able to look back, social scientists and sociologists
Yeah.
might look back and just see that this was a blip in the radar. Society was all consumed by this, but people over time realized that maybe it did more harm than good.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to agree with you, but I don't think we're mature enough to make that decision wisely. I think our overarching need to feel connected and feel like we belong supersedes the maturity to say, hey, this is bad for me. You get a feeling like you belong when you're on social media. It's like I said, it's a serotonin Pez dispenser. You get that adrenaline from it. I think LeBron is setting a good example by getting off of it, but he's also in his 40s and has had a very successful career and understands his role. He's very mature in his thinking, and he can do that because he is a part of something bigger than himself, and he probably feels like he belongs in a lot of spaces. When you're talking to a kid that lives isolated on the top of Cotton Hill, his parents are alcoholics or they're not, they're neglectful of his or her needs. Social media will provide that. So that's the people I'm worried about. Those are the people that do need some kind of connection to something. But if there isn't that connection, they're going to turn to social media and they're going
Absolutely.
to do it. So I would love for us as a society to be kind of weaning ourselves off of social media, but I just, with the basic needs of belonging, I think social media tapped into one of these core human emotions and needs. And that's why it's so popular. And that's why it came on with such a strong force.
Yeah.
And it evolves. It seems like every year there's a new social media app that's the hot thing
Yeah.
because whether or not we get bored with one, there'll be another one.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm a little bit hopeful that I'm comparing it a little bit to cigarette smoking and that that was a very social thing. And then, of course, government steps in and puts certain general warning
Yeah.
stickers and labels on it. The society becomes a little more aware of
Mhm.
the detrimental impacts to it. So it'll be interesting for you and I to sort of, I mean, I know this is a part of what you do, so you're going to have to be
Yeah.
constantly sort of monitoring this. But I do agree with what you're saying. It does
Here's the thing
tap.
about smoking, though. Smoking was an act to bring social like people socially together. It was like you got to like my grandmother with her friends in her dining room. They'd sit around, they play cards and smoke.
Yeah.
Well, you take away the cigarettes, you're still sitting around playing cards. You know what I mean? Like the government said, hey, this is really bad for you. We're going to put strict laws around this and we're going to, this is wrong. You're killing yourself. But it didn't take away that social aspect.
Yeah.
They still get around on Sunday afternoon and play Marjan and drink their coffee. And now they're just not doing it with cigarettes. So it didn't take away that feeling of belonging.
Hmm.
What I think social media does and why it's so addictive is that it provides that sense of belonging. And there's no replacement for that. If you take away social media, it's going to be hard for those people to feel and find that sense of belonging unless there's something else in place to do it.
Yeah, well, one of the three tenets of Buddhist practice is Buddha, the Buddha himself, Dharma, his teachings, and Sangha, which is community.
Yeah,
So if we could continue to sort of you and I and others, continue to spread mindfulness,
yeah,
people might start to open up their minds, realizing that real, concrete, interactive, real life community is the healthiest thing for us to seek. You know what I mean? Not
sure.
sort of this artificial version of it.
Well, that's why it's gotta start in elementary schools. It's got to start being a part of the practice of everyday life. And you have to get it into practice before the teenage brain takes over. Because if you can instill habit before the chemicals and hormones start interfering,
Mhm.
then they're habits. But when you start introducing it at a teenage level, you're going to have the emotions of a teenage brain. And so that's what I'm trying to do is get these instilled as habits and thought practices that are constantly being done and it's normalized so that even when the chemicals start flowing, it's still something that is inspiring and uplifting and students feel like they can come to this building and feel like they belong and feel like they have a space to be themselves and feel like they could trust their teachers with information to help them and not be isolated in that process.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. You kind of just made me think, and this will be my last question before we wrap up, but I'm thinking about an average student who is a student in your school, and there's this limitation to cell phone usage.
Mm.
Then they also do an after school activity, like let's say sports.
Yep.
That student is going from 7:30 in the morning through much of the day, maybe a little bit of usage during, like you said, during lunchtime, cafeteria. Then they're going into sports where something still super healthy about sports, right, is that
Yep.
they're putting their cell phones
Totally.
down while they're playing. Then the kid's going home and probably has to do, eat dinner with his family and then do homework. And so they're definitely still getting in their social media usage. There's no doubt.
Yeah.
I'm not delusional. But is there something to this kind of archetype that I'm laying out where that type of student is actually not engaging quite as bit throughout the day because of sort of those
Yes.
different.
Absolutely. Schools have to pair the removal of the phones with healthy activities. So my
Exactly.
colleague, they did away with cell phones and they used the pouches. So the students don't have access at all during the day. He noticed that during the cafeteria time, old school bullying started to happen.
Mm,
And so what he did was he bought a bunch of ping pong tables, he bought some old school arcade games, and made the cafeteria into an interactive space so that students had something to do during that downtime and they were engaging themselves in other activities other than being on their devices and bullying.
wow.
So it changes the whole structure of school. And then, I mean, I could go on for a whole other hour
Yeah.
about how we have to change the format of school and the structures of school to
Yeah.
make it more applicable to what we're sending our students into the world doing.
Absolutely. Yeah. We'll save that for another episode.
Yeah, anytime.
Well, Matt, thanks so much. I mean, obviously, you and I have reconnected over the years, and it's been phenomenal. Something that you and I both shared an interest in that I think was potentially the seed that planted both of our interests in this is music.
Yeah,
And so it's been amazing to reconnect and sort of witness your journey from afar. As you know, my whole life revolves around meditation, mindfulness, and to see you implement it on your own on the other side of the country from where I am with success in a part of the country that's still, I think, a little bit not as forward thinking
impressive.
around,
Yeah,
yeah, as the West Coast is. It's impressive and it's inspiring. And, thank you for setting this new precedent for this sort of potentially a new chapter of schooling and education. I think is really needed at this
Yeah,
time.
just needs to be replicated.
Yes. Thank you so much. It's much
Oh,
appreciated.
pleasure.
If you made it this far, that means you've listened to the whole podcast. And for that, I want to say thank you. Please feel free to visit my website or social media for more information on my work at Craig Jared French. Until next time.